No, I didn't know your name.
Yeah, exactly. It's a visual thing. He's gonna have a bag.
Out of your way. I just want to get this. Please. I'm good.
How many soul brothers do you have? Who's going to represent the city on this?
I couldn't resist.
I mean, it was a great perspective.
And we just have been
It's just that
Yeah, I feel better now. Irish. You guys drove a long way to come here. Push on the city. A lot of traffic.
I'll get out of the way.
Yeah, it's in my nature. Yeah, especially when I'm this earlier. I'm looking like this.
Table towards it.
It'll come. Right. Like sometimes.
Oh, yeah. It's ice cream bag.
Take both of them. Take the, there's three. There's one part. And then there's one in between. And then there should be the one by where the paper. Do you know what I mean? Where the little papers are at? Maybe it's hidden in the ground. And then where the asphalt dip, where the pavers are, and where the asphalt on the sewer, that should, it's probably gonna be uneven underneath it. Because they're gonna fill that in. Yeah. I hope he understands it. Meaning the, yeah, but even the bottom of it's being right to the asphalt, but they're gonna raise that. Where once it hits the grass, then it'll stay on the grass. The bottom is what the bottom is. Can you make sure he understands that?
Oh, yeah. Right. Bring it off. Yeah, no. I asked them. Okay, good. Okay. Thanks, honey.
That's right. You got it. She usually sits next to the co-chair. Oh, that quantity.
Show is about.
Is everybody? The hour of 10 o'clock having arrived, I'd like to call the Audit Commission to order. Welcome everyone back after a 90-day break. At this time, I'd like to first have Jane take attendance, take roll.
Senator Berkman. Senator Brady. Senator Manar. Senator Martinez. Senator Oberweis. Senator Raoul. Representative Crespo.
Present.
Representative Martino.
Present.
Representative Rebeletti. Representative Rice. Representative Rita. Representative Sandak.
All members present. 12 members answering the roll. All members are present, and we can proceed with business. We have some housekeeping items first to take care of. And the first item is seating of members. We have new members on the commission, and under our structure, there is no provision in our statute for midterm replacements. So there's a couple things that we need to do. Senator Oberweis, a member of the commission, I would take a motion when I'm done, but let me explain the whole situation. Under our statutes, for a member to come in midterm, the previous member who was serving must resign the General Assembly. So we do not want Senator Mulbrough to have to resign the General Assembly. We do not want Representative Brower to have to resign the General Assembly. We do not want Representative Pihos to have to resign the General Assembly. And so as in past practice, we have allowed for members to come in and serve and question. Under our act, only members of the commission may question witnesses. And so for the purposes, since Senator Dillard has left the General Assembly, I would like to get a motion from Representative Sandak to seat Senator Oberweis and to allow for questions and participation from Representatives Rice, Representative Ribeletti, and Senator Raoul. May I have that motion?
Yes, Chairman. I move that Senator Oberweis be seated as a member of the Legislative Audit Commission and that Senator Raoul, Representatives Rice and Ribeletti be permitted to participate in the proceedings today and as members of the Legislative Audit Commission.
And we will have a second to that motion by Representative Rita. Rita seconds that motion. And all in favor, aye. Opposed, same sign. In favor carries, and the members are seated. Welcome to the General Assembly. You picked, to the Audit Commission, you picked a great day. Okay. For other items, and Senator Berkman and I have talked, and we are in agreement since, so we'll have a few more motions, but we'd like to get a status update from our Executive Director, Jane Strickland, on the documents and what's on the website, since we did receive documents last night, and I hope that all have received them. I've looked at those documents and believe they are proper. And so I'd like to have Jane just give us a status update.
Representative, we have, it was my understanding that we have everything that we have received to date currently on the General Assembly website. But Ms. Johnson tells me that there may be a couple of items missing, and I'm checking just now. Emails that I received from Mr. Lavin are not posted. I received them after the close of business yesterday, and LIS was closed. And we'll do our best to get those up today.
Okay. Was there anything, everything else is on?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Received and read the emails which they received last night. Okay. All right. We're preparing to proceed with the performance audit of the state monies provided to the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority for the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. And this has been in process since May, and it has gone through many varied hearings and structures. We have heard from Jack Catrone, who has the agency where once the Violence Prevention Authority was dissolved, was placed. We then put forward a number of items for all the members to read and review, a lot of emails, and hopefully the members have done their due diligence. They have studied and are prepared for a series of audits. In the course of this, we have issued subpoenas, and we have had them responded to. We were requested by the federal government and the U.S. Attorney to delay our proceedings since they had corresponding investigations and so we went and we held off for 90 days. At the end of an 80-day period, Senator Barackman, myself, and the four councils spoke with Jim Lewis, and he gave us the green light to go ahead and speak to the witnesses and assured us that they had no additional reasons to ask us for further delay. They also said that the documents could be brought forward. They had no problem with the documents. And they have also said that there are no areas that we should refrain from in asking questions of these witnesses. And so that is our intent going forward. We will go to the Auditor General to give us an overview and comments. And then is our intention today to hear, today and tomorrow, to hear from the witnesses. We have time slots that are there. We'll be flexible on those time spots. And we will we'll begin our day. I think that every member on this commission has many questions for the program itself, for those who are directly involved in the program. And it is our hope that we can get answers to those questions today. And with that, I'd like to call upon the Auditor General to refocus and bring us back into the scope of the audit itself, what the findings were, and what we are here to discuss. General Holland.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, the performance audit of state monies provided to the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority for the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative was conducted pursuant to H.R. 1110, sponsored by, among others, Representative Rice. The resolution listed 8 specific determinations. Each of these 8 specific determinations was addressed in the audit that was released this past February. At the Commission's May 28th hearing, both Mr. Schlauch and I made extensive and detailed opening remarks. Suffice it to say, the audit clearly demonstrates a program that was hastily implemented and poorly managed. As you know, the audit contains 19 recommendations which, if addressed and implemented, would make programs like the one being discussed here today more transparent and more effective. Now, since we met in July, there has been one development to this audit that I would like to bring to your attention. My office undergoes a peer review every 3 years. The peer review is conducted by auditing professionals from across the United States. Those individuals independently select which audits they are going to examine in detail. They then review each to ensure that those audits were conducted in accordance with all applicable professional auditing standards. Now, just last month, my office went through this peer review process. Several audits were selected for review, including this NRI audit. The result, my office obtained the highest peer review rating possible. I am extremely proud of the work of my staff, not just on this audit, but on all the audits that we have done during my 23 years as Auditor General. That concludes my remarks.
For further comments, Senator Berrickman.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Martino. And to begin, I want to thank Representative Martino for his cooperation and friendship. I think in preparation of this important hearing, we have had some spirited disagreements. That happens. We have different opinions and different points of view. I think we've each vigorously advocated for what we thought was right, and in the end we found common ground more times than not. You've given a little, I've given a little, and I think that's what should happen as we move forward with our legal responsibility to review the audit of this failed NRI program. I speak for all the Republican members on this commission when we say we look forward to working with you today and in the future. I'd also like to acknowledge General Holland and his staff. General Holland, as you just heard, has served as the independent Illinois Auditor General for over 20 years. He and his staff consistently excel at delivering the independent professional service that we've come to expect from an office that was designed to rise above any politics of the day. And without surprise, General Holland and his team have again provided the legislature a guide, their audit and its recommendations, which will undoubtedly make Illinois better. So thank you, General Holland, and to your team for your continued work. Today, we continue our statutorily required review of the first 2 years of the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. Some say this is just a grossly mismanaged state program. Others call it political use of taxpayer dollars. We've seen months of news stories detailing the flaws of the NRI program. 2 federal criminal investigations have further stoked the public's questions into what went wrong, how taxpayer money was wasted, and how the integrity of legitimate programs is now being questioned and threatened. Our audit is our roadmap. It tells us what happened, along with its specific recommendations. It tells us that the program was hastily implemented, had pervasive deficiencies in its operation, and that some of the most violent areas in our state were ignored. Today, we'll hopefully begin to understand how things went wrong, so that we may incorporate our findings with the Auditor General's recommendations and make changes to our state government so we won't see a failure of this magnitude again. But as we do this, I think it's important to truly understand what is at stake with these proceedings. Illinois is the 5th largest state in the United States, has nearly 13 million people. Communities throughout Illinois have been rocked by violence. Chicago has had 1,927 victims of gun violence in just the first 9 months of 2014. It leads the news and splashes across the front pages every day, including today. If you know Chicago well, you can point on a map to the areas and the neighborhoods plagued with some of the highest crime rates in our state. In 2012, the last year we have statewide data, 500 murders were recorded in Chicago. But violence is not limited to those borders. Another 244 murders happened elsewhere in the state that year. As community leaders, families, and victims struggle with the impact violence and crime have on them, it grabs our attention as state lawmakers. The people of Illinois are looking to us for solutions. 20 years ago, Illinois took thoughtful steps to combat violence. With bipartisan Prevention Authority was created in 1995 as the first agency of its kind dedicated to violence prevention in the United States. In creating the IVPA, the legislature recognized the need for a comprehensive, collaborative public health and public safety approach to violence prevention. The two sponsors of the program were from downstate, my friend and predecessor in the Senate, Senator John Maitland of Bloomington, and Representative Tom Ryder of Jerseyville, who said at the time the legislation was, quote, one of his personal favorites. The creation of the IVPA received near unanimous support from now Congressman Jan Schakowsky to former U.S. Senator Peter Fitzgerald. One of our witnesses, Barbara Shaw, played a significant role in the creation of IVPA, as she was the leader of anti-violence groups before it was in to do so. Governor Jim Edgar signed legislation creating the authority, and Attorney General Jim Ryan was a strong supporter. The Illinois Violence Prevention Authority was the first of its kind in the entire nation. So as we proceed today, I hope we all consider what's truly at stake. The people of Illinois and the communities we represent are aware of the violence that plagues our streets. The people want their government to do something about it. They want meaningful action. But as you read this audit file, it becomes abundantly clear that this NRI program isn't a solution to the problems we face. This neighborhood recovery initiative failed. It failed the very people and the communities it was meant to serve. Just as shameful, the profound failure of Governor Quinn's NRI program led to the demise of the state's Violence Prevention Authority. What was once a first-in-the-nation program, a statewide initiative to address violence prevention, was disbanded. Shut down are the words the governor keeps saying. Well, what kind of a response to violence is that? To shut down the very agency asked to develop and implement a statewide program for violence prevention? What does this say to those community leaders, families, and victims who rely on us for solutions to these problems? It says that because of Governor Quinn's failed NRI program, our state has taken a step backwards from 20 years ago. So what's at stake here? This is our opportunity to learn, to hear from those intimately involved in the creation and the management of this program, and to begin to put the pieces together so that Illinois can become a leader in violence prevention. The people of Chicago and all of Illinois are demanding an end to the violence that threatens their families and communities, and the taxpayers of Illinois are demanding that their government be good stewards of their money. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to proceed with our hearings. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and we are going to hear from a number of witnesses in the coming days. And so at this time, I would like to ask Barbara Shaw. Yes. Okay. Well, actually, Chairman Barackman, would you administer? Oh, okay. Well, you take the tape. And Representative Sandak, for the purpose of a motion.
Thank you, Chairman. I move that pursuant to Section 4 of the Legislative Audit Commission Act, the Commission authorize either co-chair to administer an oath to each witness subpoenaed by the Audit Commission prior to their testimony.
Thank you, Representative Sandak. And for a second, Senator Martinez. And we need a roll call vote on that. So if there's no further discussion on it, Jane, would you take the roll?
Senator Barackman.
Yes.
Senator Brady. Senator Menard, Senator Martinez, Senator Oberweis, Senator Raul, Representative Crespo, Representative Martino, Representative Rebeletti, Representative Rice, Representative Rita, Representative Sandak.
Voting yes, 0 voting no. The motion carries. Welcome, Mrs. Shaw. Would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you may give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
There it is. For the record, John Tice, T-H-E-I-S. I'm attorney for Barbara Shaw, present with her, and she's here pursuant to the subpoena of the commission. Before beginning her responses to the questions that you might have, we've had a conversation with staff and been informed that she will be allowed to make a brief opening statement, which she has prepared, and she would like to do that first. And just if any of the members of the commission, we do have written copies of her remarks if they want copies of them as well.
Thank you, and please have the staff give us written copies of the remarks. And it is my intention to hear opening statements from each of the witnesses. That is something that we have offered forever in the Audit Commission itself. And so thank you for appearing and agreeing to talk with us about your program. Please make your opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the Commission. My name is Barbara Shaw, as you know, and I was the director of the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority since its inception through September of 2012, when I retired. Thank you for letting me make a brief statement today. My main purpose is to give you my perspective on the NRI program. I have 2 points that I would like to make. First, that IVPA, while a small agency, had a long history of solid performance and accomplishments. Solid performance and accomplishments. Second, the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative was a serious program addressing a serious problem. The program had multiple components that created jobs in economically distressed communities and helped these communities develop and implement a range of interventions to support youth and help them stay on track. IVPA was created by statute, as was mentioned, the Illinois Violence Prevention Act of 1995, signed by Governor Jim Edgar, began operations in FY '98. I was appointed executive director of the agency by the co-chairs, then Attorney General Jim Ryan, and then director of the Illinois Department of Public Health, Dr. John Lumpkin. Only executive director from July '97 through September 2012, when I retired. I brought to IVPA at the time I started over 20 years of experience working at the local, state, and national level on violence prevention and related issues, including development and administration of our state's domestic violence shelter and service system in the '80s. Since its inception and prior to the launch of NRI, IVPA worked closely with executive and policy leaders from both sides of the aisle and with other state agencies to administer over $76 million in grants to all types of agencies throughout the state. Schools, police departments, community agencies, health departments, state coalitions, universities, all types of organizations. In the 13 years prior of the agency's existence, prior to NRI, we had stellar compliance audits, and we were nationally recognized by CDC and others for IVPA's innovative approaches to violence prevention. Given an opportunity to expand our work with the governor's decision to invest in violence prevention in 2010, IVPA took on the challenge with vigor. We knew it needed to be done, and we felt a sense of urgency because many Chicago communities had just come through a summer of horrific violence, including the videoed beating to death of a Fenger High School student. And these communities were suffering from economic decline and job loss. IVPA was an obvious choice to administer NRI because IVPA was highly regarded for its vision and the types of initiatives it funded, seeded, and started. IVPA was a seasoned manager of innovative violence prevention grant programs, including the Safe from the Start program, which funds a network of services to children, young children, traumatized by violence, the only network like it in the country. IVPA was experienced in serving high-risk communities, and we were already working in many of the communities that the Department of Human Services, DHS, had identified as having a combination of high rates of violence, poverty, and youth disengagement from school. Violence was not the only measure by which those communities were selected. Now to the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. Again, NRI was a serious program, comprehensive, addressing a serious problem in the Chicago area communities. Kids were dying. In 2010, nearly 700 Chicago children were shot, and 66 of them died. NRI was based on the premise that a large-scale approach to violence prevention needed to be multifaceted, no one program, multifaceted, and rooted in and systematically involve the community. This was not a top-down approach. Over 190 community agencies were involved in building community networks that delivered NRI programs in the 23 NRI communities. The NRI program was developed through a lens of public health, a preventive approach that addresses multiple issues and areas of intervention shown to be effective in reducing the prevalence and impact of risk factors, preventive approaches that address the risk factors that contribute to the likelihood that a child may be engaged in violence in the future. Risk factors such as poverty, childhood exposure to trauma and violence, and disconnection from family, school, and community supports. This approach, the public health approach, also works to build resilience and promote protective factors that can reduce the effects of exposure and risks by providing employment, mentoring, and community supports for disengaged youth returning to communities from youth centers or correctional facilities. Under this public health approach, NRI provided thousands of jobs and helped build the community's capacity to coordinate a network of programs and prevention services for children and youth. There were 5 NRI components, and we developed them in collaboration with many state and private sector leaders and experts. We created steering committees for each of these components that had experts and leaders in the field to help us shape these programs. The 5 components: school-based counseling, largely for elementary age kids, to reduce trauma and promote emotional self-regulation. Kids were bouncing off the walls because of the trauma and chaos in their communities and in their lives. Mentored, team-based employment in the summer that involved youth in the violence prevention effort, engaged them in helping deal with this problem. Parent leadership and engagement. Reentry services for juveniles and young adults returning to communities from Illinois youth centers and prisons. There was no such network of services prior to NRI. And finally, the Safety Networks program, which provided case management support and youth development for youth at risk. As you know, there was a lead agency in each neighborhood responsible for making sure that these elements, these components, were implemented and incorporated into a coordinated community approach. Remember, we were trying to build a community-based infrastructure that could engage in this work. NRI programs were delivered by community agencies selected through an application process conducted by the lead agencies with advice from their required advisory committees. Substantial training was provided for staff of each component, and an online data system was developed to capture program participant, service, and intermediate outcome data. We were building a system. There are many positive stories about NRI that have not been heard. The focus has been on the relatively few organizations that had problems. People say we have to get to the bottom of the NRI program. I say we have to get to the middle and the top and look at the excellent work that was done. There is no question that not all the ideas worked equally well in all communities, or that all agencies were as successful as most. But the approach was sound and resulted in jobs for thousands of people in economically distressed communities, much needed services that reached thousands of youth and parents, and highly productive levels of community coordination. The NRI lead and partner agencies in these communities were highly engaged in implementing NRI successfully, and generally they did a great job. The program was very well received, and communities were very proud of their participating youth and parents. To the purpose of today's hearing, there were many issues raised in the audit that I'm sure will be discussed through your questions today. I am also sure that had the program and the agency continued, IVPA would have learned from the recommendations in the audit and would have worked diligently to improve its practices and procedures. We would have built on the NRI infrastructure that we had developed and provide what communities challenged by poverty and violence need: sustained efforts over time that reach children and youth at various critical points and stages in their lives and helps them survive, cope, and thrive with the support of their families and communities. It was an honor and a privilege to have worked for IVPA and to have had the opportunity to take a comprehensive approach to scale in so many communities. With few exceptions, I am proud of the work performed by staff, lead agencies, and providers in their efforts to build a community response to joblessness and violence. With that, I am ready and will do my best to answer any questions that the Commission may have. Thank you.
Mrs. Shaw, thank you for your opening statement, and I'm glad that you've come here to speak with the members of the Commission. You, above all, are the person that I wanted to talk to on this audit. So often in this Commission, by the time we receive the audit, the director isn't there. I've known of your work for 20 years. I was there when your agency was created. So I understand that. So I think that you have a story to tell and some questions that can be answered by you, and we appreciate that you are here. We have a number of hours worth of questions, so we will begin. Our first question would be Senator Minar.
Thank you,
so we will
Mr.
go
Chairman.
to Senator Minar for the purposes of questions, then to Representative Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barbara, good to see you. Let me start off by asking to remind us why you were not here in July when we had I think we had 14 hours worth of hearings in July. Mr. Tice was here. But what has changed between this day and July that would compel your attendance today?
The federal investigators have told you that you could proceed, and I interpreted that as the opportunity then for me to be here and tell the story.
Very good. Senator Barrickman mentioned the enabling legislation, which was House Bill 1967. The year was 1995. He mentioned that in his opening comments, and you did as well. And I think it would be a good place to start the hearing today to dive a little bit deeper into that piece of legislation that created the agency itself, set many things into motion. And if you read the debate, your name was actually mentioned during the debate of that bill on the House floor and I believe on the Senate floor as well. So your history and your involvement in the issue, as the chairman just stated, I think is second to none in the state. But the bill was described as a good bill, a bill that will do good for decades to come, and it had a statewide mission. That was a point that was made multiple times during the back and forth in the House. The sponsor in the House said that the Violence Prevention Authority and its funding has distributive qualities, and that was a term that was used by the sponsor. So can you give us an explanation of what that means, distributive qualities?
I think that referred to, it's a long time ago, but I think that referred to the fact that the agency was set up to make resources available and to distribute resources to communities throughout the state to enable them to implement violence prevention activities.
And would you say that also meant to be effective? You know, distribute money, funds available in an effective manner to address an issue that has been deemed important, in this case by the legislature and by the authority. The sponsor said, quote, "For far too long, many of us have dealt with the symptoms of the disease of violence, building prisons, making sentences harsher without dealing with the cause," end quote. That was a statement by Representative Ryder, who is a dear friend of mine, when he presented the bill in the House. He also described violence as a, quote, health care issue. Expound on that a little bit.
You know, about that time, the Surgeon General and the public health community in our country had begun to recognize and declare that violence was a public health issue. In fact, Surgeon General Satcher said, some people say violence isn't a health issue. I say, why are people dying from it then? So it was clearly becoming recognized as a public health issue. And public health lens, or a public health approach to issues like that, is to do as much as possible to go upstream and prevent the problem from happening in the first place. It focuses on interventions and strategies that are not just law enforcement, criminal justice practices, which had largely been the way that we were treating violence up to that point, after the fact. We were sheltering victims after they'd been injured. We were putting people in prison after the crime had been committed. Public health approach is a prevention approach that goes upstream and looks at the risks that, for example, exposure to violence by young children. So many young children grow up in homes where violence is all around them, domestic violence and other forms of violence. They learn it, they are traumatized by it. So a public health approach would work to reduce those risk factors and try to prevent that from happening and intervene with children when they're young, so in order to try to keep them from later in their lives perpetrating violence.
So that was 1995 when the bill was passed. It was signed into law. It was enacted. The agency, as a state entity funded by the General Assembly from various sources, was set into motion. That was many years ago. Where are we today? Where is the view of violence today from a public health care issue as compared to where it was in 1995? Have we gotten better? Have we gotten worse? Is there cause for greater concern or less concern? Where are we compared to where we were in 1995 when the state made the commitment toward addressing violence?
Well, I would say several things about that. One is from a sort of national perspective and the climate that we're in, that the public health approach to violence has developed throughout the country, that our Chicago Department of Public Health has a focus on violence prevention. Many of the the local public health departments recognize violence prevention as part of their mission. We have a much more of an understanding of what are the risk and protective factors that contribute to violence. Violence on the whole, as you know, has gone down over the last decade. We have in Illinois developed a network of community-based organizations and statewide systems that now incorporate violence prevention into their community and statewide work. We have, I think, developed through NRI and through other programs improved the capacity of communities to engage in prevention work. We still have a long way to go. As you know, the injuries and deaths continue to occur. The young age at which so many of these occur is still extremely alarming. School systems throughout the state, as a result partially as a result of funding through IVPA in 2000 through 2003, have developed safety and security measures and violence prevention programs. And we're working with NRI even to implement school-based approaches. So what we see is violence prevention, not just the purview of the criminal justice system. We see violence prevention the purview of our educational system, of our community service agencies, human service agencies, of parents groups, and there's more engagement in the work.
So the origination of the Violence Prevention Authority began at a place with every intention to get at what you described, not overnight, but over any number of years.
Decades.
Which requires investment.
Investment and over time.
And executing.
This is a long-term, violence has been with us for centuries, and it is a problem that is not going to go away overnight, and that requires sustained, focused effort over time.
Let me read you one more quote from the debate on the House floor, and then I want to get into. I just have some budget questions about how money was approved within the FY11 budget before the program was shut down. But I don't think the Violence Prevention Authority was created to be a promotional tool for elected officials. Would you agree with that?
100%.
It was stated on the House floor that this particular representative hoped to see George Ryan's face promoting this on TVs, hear his voice on radio, and his picture on placards, because it's such a good thing. So, despite that, and that comes from the transcript of the House debate, you would say that the Violence Prevention Authority was not created to promote the agenda of a political figure, an elected official, but it was created strictly for the purposes of getting at the root of violence from a multifaceted approach, which requires investment and good execution.
Yes, we were a mission-driven agency.
All right. FY11, you were given a direct appropriation of, my memory's failing me here, I think it was about $10 million in the budget at the time, and there was about $45 million transferred from other line items in the FY11 budget not contained in the appropriation for the Violence Prevention Authority, but that were used for the NRI program. So where did that $45 million come from in the budget?
They came from the governor's lump sum allocation. And in FY11, the legislature cut human services type agency budgets and gave the governor large lump sums of money and asked the governor to make the decision as to where those dollars were to go. So these dollars that were made available for the NRI program were from the governor's lump sum allocation.
So there was no defining language in the appropriation that would limit either your decision or the governor's office or another agency's decision about where money goes for what purpose?
If you're referring to the appropriation to the governor's office, the lump sum appropriation, no, there wasn't. You know, I don't recall the exact statutory language. There may have been something that said for human service type organizations or whatever. I can't speak to the appropriation statute, but my understanding is that this was a lump sum allocated to the governor for purposes in making funding decisions.
So when you became aware, you were aware obviously of the $10 million appropriation because it was your budget, and when you became aware of you know, a sizable amount of money, $40 million in addition to what was already appropriated to you, were there any initial concerns about the capacity of the agency to administer that amount of money?
Well, not really. I mean, we had had a ballooning of our appropriation in 2000 to 2000 through 2002 when the Safe to Learn program was adopted, and we went from 1 or 2 million to 15 million overnight and added staff to do that. Our plan with NRI was to add staff to help us implement the program. So, you know, and I want to say at this point, I'm not exactly sure about this 40 million figure. So just to say, I'm not sure where that exact figure is coming from. But there was a large lump sum of money appropriated or moved from the governor's lump sum to IVPA.
So you were confident that the agency could handle the appropriation authority that was given to the agency by both directly the General Assembly and the governor's office through a discretionary lump sum.
I felt at the time that we, through additional staff and through utilizing our basic mechanisms of grant management, that we would be able to handle it. I will say to all of you, my single most major regret associated with the NRI program is that I did not ask for more staff. We ended up with 5 people as the NRI team to administer NRI. If you recall, too, this was a climate of cutbacks and headcount decreases. So I felt like I was eking out additional people to help us implement the program. In fact, in December of 10, right after we had started the program, we received from GOMBI, Governor's Office of Management and Budget, a request to turn in that were a cut in our budget significantly and a cut in our head count. And in the emails and documents that are online is our response saying, you know, we can't sustain the kind of budget cut that you're talking about, and we really can't sustain the kind of headcount cut that you're talking about, given that you have asked us to implement the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative and others. So, you know, it was a climate of cutbacks, and I regret that I didn't say, you know what, particularly 6 months into it. I mean, the other issue I want to say is that we did not know at the outset, really, how difficult and challenging this program was going to be. And so, you know, it really took us a while to in making it work, and in a climate where staffing was being cut rather than being increased.
When the selection process, so after you received, I mean, you got a feeling for the amount of money that was being directed toward the program, a large amount of money that again came from both an appropriation to your agency and an appropriation to a discretionary lump sum.
May I clarify
Sure,
what you're
sure.
saying? The NRI program, are you saying that the NRI program received an appropriation and governor's lump sum money? That is not the case in FY11. It was the case in FY12. In FY12, the program received, this year two, the program received, NRI program received a $10 million appropriation from the General Assembly and then was supplemented with
With the lump
additional
sum.
lump sum dollars.
Gotcha. So once you had in both years, once you had an idea of the money, there was a selection process that began, and I want to go back to 1995, and the words statewide mission were used for the enabling legislation that set up the Violence Prevention Authority. And I think you would be the first to recognize that the challenges that we face with both poverty and violence are not just challenges that are exclusive to the city of Chicago. So during the selection process, and I'm sure we'll get into much more detail, but my question revolves around the idea that NRI was concentrated in one part of the state when you could, I think, make a credible argument backed up by evidence and statistics that that communities such as Decatur or the east side of Springfield would be at the time and today experiencing the same, if not greater, violence when it comes to guns and things that are associated with everything that NRI was intended to get at. Was there a determination to make the selection process exclusive only to Chicago or neighborhoods in Chicago?
We were asked by the governor's office to develop the NRI program for the Chicago area. And I would add to that we again were coming off a terrible summer in Chicago, and the levels and the pervasiveness and just the sheer numbers as compared to the balance of state were really high. And that was the Chicago area communities were calling out to the governor's office, asking for help in this area. So it was a really major issue at the time. But we were asked to implement the program in the Chicago area.
And that was a specific request, that the
Correct.
program be limited to Chicago neighborhoods.
Chicago area.
Chicago area neighborhoods. All right. What in times past, I've heard you remark and provide statistics and evidence-based, data that shows what prevention programs accomplish. And you mentioned this in your opening remarks, and you acknowledged that there were blatant errors, there were incredible mistakes with this program on a small scale. Where
did I acknowledge that?
Well, let me please clarify. I thought that's.
What I said was that we would have learned from the recommendations that came from the auditor. This program was not perfect. There are certainly problems and mistakes and so forth. I don't know that the adjectives that you applied I would necessarily comfortably apply, and I hope that through questions maybe there can be some balancing information about the findings.
The organizations that had problems was
I
a
see.
statement in your
Okay, all right.
a sentence in your
Okay.
statement. That's what I'm
Okay,
referring to.
I'm sorry, I misheard you.
Right. So why do you think the Violence Prevention Authority was disbanded?
You know, that happened after I retired, and I think you would have to ask those who were involved in making that decision. I cannot speculate on that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Further questions? Representative Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Shaw, for coming today, and certainly got to know you over the years on appropriations, and you know, I just want to fully say, and I think I speak for everybody on the commission here, that no one doubts your passion for these programs. We might disagree philosophically about things, and that may be people amongst your own party, but that's not why we're here today. We're here to discuss the audit and the fact that you know, we had some doubts about the way things were being implemented in 2011 during our appropriation committee hearings. We really had some serious doubts in 2012, and I think that this audit really outlines those problems, and we'll see with an audit that's been ordered on the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority if in fact these recommendations have been implemented. I know Senator Menard has kind of went back on the timeline, but I wanted to ask a few more questions. Who makes up the Illinois Violence Protection Prevention Authority's board members? Did you have appointments? Did the AG's office? Did Department of Public Health?
By statute, the agency's enabling statute provided for 2 co-chairs of the authority, who would be the sitting Attorney General and the sitting Director of Public Health, because we took a public safety and a public health approach to violence prevention. The director or designee of a number of state agencies that would be connected to violence prevention, ranging from the State Board of Education to the Department of Corrections to Department of Human Services and Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. So a variety of state agencies and their directors or designees. And then each of the co-chairs had appointments. And we added a few years later that the chairperson of the Youth Advisory Board that we created would also have a seat on the authority board.
So
if
you met several times a year, and they voted on pretty much everything you've moved forward with up to that point. Grant approvals. The board was very, as I can tell, engaged and voted on a lot of things. Is that right?
The board, yes, the board voted on all funding applications and funding awards. The staff took to the board at our quarterly meetings any funding recommendations we had for that period. The board approved the rules that we adopted for our grants. If we were going to initiate a new program that was coming out of IVPA, we would consult with the board in design. The board also conducted a 5-year planning process every 5 years, and we would facilitate that process with the board.
Okay. I also see here that, now let me back up. Has the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority been disbanded or just NRI?
The Illinois Violence Prevention Act of 1995 was repealed.
Repealed. So there's no board, there's nothing going on there at all?
There's no board, there's no, the fund that was created by the act, the Illinois Violence Prevention Fund, created in the state treasury, became a fund of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. The act was repealed.
So I also saw that one of the sources of funding for IVPA was the proceeds from the sale of special prevent violence license plates.
Correct.
Are those license plates still in effect, and where is that money going now?
Oh, yes, I drive around with one on my car. They are still sold. They are one of the many specialty plates available. At the time that the Violence Prevention Act was created, we were the second specialty plate. There had only been the E plate, and then the PV plate was the second plate that was created.
Do you recall how much money a year that generated?
You know, we waited for a while to...
No, I meant today.
Oh, today. I would say several $100,000.
Do you know where that money
$300,000 to $400,000.
Do you know where that money is going today?
Oh, yes, that money, well, literally, in terms of what grants have been made, the money goes into the Violence Prevention Fund, and those dollars are used to implement the grants that the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority makes relative to violence prevention.
Okay.
And my understanding is that some of the programs that we started are continuing. For example, the Safe from the Start program, the program that provides services to young children who have been traumatized by violence. You know, mother kills father, kills self, and then child is traumatized, and these services are there for them.
Certainly all terrible stories. So going through the timeline here, in July of 2010, the Illinois Violence Protection Authority adopts administrative rules for administering grants. This was long before a lot of things happened. What made the board adopt these administrative rules to oversee the grant process?
Well, first of all, let me say that IVPA started in FY '98, July 1 of '97, and we experienced 2-year compliance audits as did every other agency, and there was no mention to us by anybody of the need to or the need to create rules until the Auditor General's office in, I think it was 2007, I want to say, 2007 or 2008, told the authority as part of its compliance audit that they thought we should adopt rules for our grant making. The Attorney General's office, the attorneys who are working with us, consulted an old opinion by Jim Ryan on this topic and advised us, the IVPA, that we didn't have the authority to make rules, and nor were we required to make rules. So we kind of went back and forth with the Auditor General's office on that, saying, you know, the Attorney General's office is saying that we don't have the authority and that we don't have to make rules. But we subsequently, wanting to comply with the Auditor General's desire that we create rules, we went back to the legislature, and I think it was 2009, and amended our enabling statute to enable us to literally make it clear that we were authorized to make rules. Then we promulgated, then we made our rules, our board adopted them, and they were promulgated through the normal rulemaking process.
And I bring that up, Barb, because, you know, you mentioned that, you know, we wish we would have had this audit earlier because we learned a lot of lessons from it, but yet you kind of did that when you adopted those rules, and most of the, I think, findings in this audit report were requirements in your own administrative rules. So, you know, it leads questions as to why the rules weren't followed. But we'll get to that in a little bit. In July 26 of 2010, the governor signed an executive order creating the Illinois Anti-Violence Commission. And it goes through a lot of whereases, but the end, it says, the commission shall report its findings and recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly no later than November 16th of 2010. So just kind of hold that thought in your mind. The governor set up this commission through his executive order, and he wanted to find out how they could better serve and better prevent violence. But yet, as early as August 20th, I think the wheels started turning that we're not going to necessarily wait on the report and the findings of that commission, but we're going to start our own program. And it started out a different name. But I guess my question first is, who from the governor's office said, let's go ahead with this? Who gave you the directive to start putting the parameters together for this new program in August?
I was approached in about the end of August, I want to say 18th, 19th, somewhere in there, 17th, by Malcolm Weems, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, and I was told that the governor wanted to make a significant investment in violence prevention and asked me to come up with a model.
Did anyone say you've got a commission out there? Let's wait for them. Let's see what they're going to come back with. I mean, I know it was a violent summer, and that commission should have had lots of information to put their recommendation together. But I mean, did anyone say no? Let's wait. We're getting a report in November.
Well, let's distinguish. I mean, the commission was a commission, not a state agency that would have responsibility for developing or managing programs. It was a commission that was comprised of individuals who had all lost someone to violence. And that commission was planning hearings throughout the state to get feedback in general about what we should do about violence in our state. Whether or not they would have recommended specific programs or what have you is uncertain. I think at the same time, and for the same reason that the governor created the commission, he made an investment in the area of the state that was suffering the most.
Did that commission ever issue a report?
You know, yes, at least let me say this. I remember draft copies of it. So I would assume that there was an eventual formal report.
I'm not sure that anyone on the commission has that, and we've been told that they never issued a report. But if for some reason you might have that,
I wasn't a member of the commission.
No, but and that's why I asked if the report was issued and you thought there was. Okay, so you started putting this together, and it's my understanding from notes and emails that it started out as a 12 lead agency or $10 million,
no,
and then
20.
in a matter of, okay, and then in a matter of days it went to 30, and it just kept increasing. You talked about your track record prior to that point being very good, administering programs and stuff. Why didn't you just say, why don't we try a pilot program? Why don't we try this in 4 or 5 communities, additionally to what we're doing now, instead of it going boom, 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 clear up to 23 agencies and 199 coordinating partners and 120 providing partners in a matter of weeks?
Well, there are several things I want to say in response to that. First, the opportunity to do what needed to be done on a scale that the NRI program and the governor's investment suggested was an opportunity that the Violence Prevention Authority that I didn't think we would want to miss. I mean, here was an opportunity to really provide communities with some meaningful resources. Most of the programming that we had been able to support up to that point was a program here, a program here, a program here, nothing that was comprehensive and engaged the community as a whole in a variety of types of interventions at a variety of points in children's lives, from elementary trauma reduction, school-based, to reentry for kids coming back into communities from correctional facilities. So it was an opportunity to make a difference at a time when kids were dying and the violence was extreme. So we took it on with vigor because it was an opportunity to really make a difference.
But I mean, looking back, and we have this long list of things that were deficient, it would have seemed to me that it would have been much better to start out with a pilot program and grow with size, but I know you were wanting to get things going that particular fall. On an email September 5th to Ivan and Malik, you said we appear to be about to take off on a big ride, build a strong violence prevention movement in Chicago that truly works at the community level and enriches everyone involved. What did you mean by enriches everyone involved?
I meant that it enriches the violence prevention community, it enriches communities, it enables youth to have a role in the program. That's what I meant.
Is it the role of government, though, to enrich people or businesses with taxpayer money?
You know, enrich is not a term that necessarily applies to money. Enrich means to grow and to empower.
Okay. You mentioned Paula Wolf in a couple email documents. Who is Paula Wolf, and how did she help get the anti-violence? It's from Monday, September 6th, and it's just, hi Paula, here is some brief summary of the information about the Governor's Save Our Youth initiative, which is what the precursor name was. Talks about steering committee, and it talks about being on a fast track, and that you're real excited. So I just wondered who Paula Wolf was. That's my question, not the email itself.
Many of you probably know Paula Wolf. Paula Wolf, at the time, was with Metropolis Strategies and a leader in youth justice system reform, and a member of a number of groups I was involved in. I met Paula years before when she was in Governor Thompson's office, and I was administering the domestic violence shelter and service system. So we were colleagues and friends.
So as September moved along, you mentioned several times that this is very fast track, and you put together a lead agency profile. And there's several things mentioned in there. Members of the commission should have it and should have read it. But in that, the most glaring thing that stood out to me was that after the protocol was put together and the applications went out, that they were due on October 8th of 2010. If you want to be a lead agency, you need to have your application and all the supporting documentation in by October 8th. I mean, that's listed on the application itself.
So let me distinguish something for you, Representative. The profile sheet is distinct from the proposal. There was, we put out a request for proposal, and the applicants to be the lead agencies had to complete that proposal and submit that proposal by October 8th.
Right. I understand that.
The profile sheet's a different thing.
Well, I meant after you put the parameters together for the program, then you put the application together is what I meant. But yes, it's clearly stated and you agreed that they were due on October 8th.
Yes.
Okay. September 14th, 2010, you have an email that goes out to a group of people, which now looking at was the 23 lead agencies that were eventually chosen. And I'm just wondering how on September 14th we knew who the 23 lead agencies were when the applications weren't due until October 8th.
Well, as you know from the various documents in the audit, the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority turned to local elected officials to recommend lead agencies who could be potential candidates for the lead agency position or the lead agency role. And the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority then provided to those recommended entities this request for proposal. So at that time, we had a list of, that's what the profile sheets were. The profile sheets were sheets that gave us the basic information about the recommended lead agency. The email that went out to those people, I believe, is an email, I think it's notifying them of the bidders conference that we were having for those who were, for the applicants conference, I should call it, for the applicants for these dollars, and answered their questions about the RFP itself. Can I ask what email you're referring to?
September 14th, 2010, and it does mention the September 16th applicant meeting, but it also says applications must be submitted by October 8th. But then here's another email from September 14th saying that some people had contacted either you or Tony Irving or someone saying that they were interested in, but the email says let them know that they were not selected as a lead agency and that they should not attend the meeting on September 16th because the meeting is for lead agencies only.
Right. There were, again, we turn to local elected officials because they know their communities and ask them to recommend an applicant for the NRI funds, one for each community. There were, I would say, maybe 2, maybe 3 faxes that came in from organizations that had somehow heard about this and sent in information saying that they wanted to apply for these funds, and we informed them that they were not the recommended, they were not the agency selected by their local aldermen to apply for these funds.
But that isn't what the application stated. The application says you submit your proposal and that we'll decide by October 8th who's going to be lead agency.
We will decide whether your application is acceptable. There again, we had been operating a collaborative grants program for many years as an agency where we would outreach to individual organizations and invite them to apply through a proposal process. We always issued a proposal to any applicant for funds. This was not a competitive grants program. We did not make it available to anyone who was interested. The application was available to those who had been recommended to apply.
Okay. Well, I guess where I'm headed with this is now that suddenly the fast track really turned into a fast track and that we bumped up who was picked as a lead agency even before the October 8th deadline. And I think there's several documents that shed light on this. But back to your thing that aldermen were asked to pick lead agencies.
To recommend lead agencies.
To recommend.
Yes.
I guess that's one of the things that we're so troubled about was that House Committee went to certain aldermen and said, pick somebody in your district or your area or your community. How this is a fair and open process to get the funds truly to the areas that had the most crime. I mean, did you have a problem going to aldermen and such saying, who do you recommend?
Well, several things I want to pick up on in what you said in your question. First of all, we didn't go to just certain aldermen. We reached out to the aldermen whose district wards, whose wards covered the community areas where we were intending to place NRI. Those aldermen, in some cases, there were 2 or 3 aldermen for a particular area. So they had to work together to identify their recommended lead.
Was any background checks done? I know it says in your administrative rules that background checks on these agencies were supposed to be done, whether they were in good standing, whether they had administered grants in previous occasions correctly. Was any of that done, or was this just taken?
Oh, yes. As part of the application process, we certainly did look at the standing of...
So Chicago Area Project didn't raise any red flags?
No, it did not. Chicago Area Project was a grantee of a number of state agencies at that point, a highly regarded network of providers of youth services.
And they never had any problems implementing grants?
We had no knowledge of any problems that Chicago area had in administering grants.
Okay. How is the NRI rolling out of this? How is it tied together with the Illinois Children's Mental Health Partnership? Was there any collaboration there?
There was some collaboration in that the Children's Mental Health Partnership had funds available through DMH, the Division of Mental Health, DHS, that were to be used to build a model of the Mentoring Plus Jobs and Parent Leadership Initiative. This was prior to the start of NRI, and so when NRI came on board, those funds we utilized to help us get started with our evaluation process.
Did that money come from MEE? What was MEE's cost?
MEE, Motivational Educational Entertainment, is a social marketing firm that had that the Children's Mental Health Partnership had worked with for 4 or 5 years prior to NRI. This was an entity that specialized in social marketing on public health issues for Black and brown youth primarily, aimed at issues of drug use, mental health, sexual health, healthy sexual behaviors, violence prevention, and their model for M+J, Mentoring Plus Jobs component of NRI, and the Parent Leadership component were the models that we utilized in the NRI system.
Did they give you any startup money?
Pardon?
Did they give you any startup money?
MEE give us startup money? No.
Okay. Staying on the your administrative rules, Section C of your administrative rules talks about proposed budgets and line item costs for personnel. I'm certain that that would include timesheets and things like that. As we found out, a lot of that wasn't done. Timesheets, budgets submitted on time. Were there any provisions in your administrative rules for penalties for those agencies that didn't comply with the rules of the grant?
Well, our rules, if I recall, and again, it's been a few years, I recall our rules indicating that prior performance should be taken into consideration when awarding grants. I'm trying to remember, there were 2 parts to your questions, timesheets and
I mean,
quarterly reports.
they were obviously in violation. So was there any penalties put in?
You know, late reports, the IVPA never, prior to NRI, ever considered a late report grounds for discontinuing a grant. Late reports happen for a variety of reasons.
But it says in your
we worked hard with our grantees to get their reports in on time. If they weren't in on time, we called them and we worked with them to get those reports in on time. We were not out to discontinue programming on the basis of late reports.
But yet your administrative rule says that they have to be in on a certain time, and
well, sure, there are the rules say that we are to establish due dates, which we had, and there were occasions many occasions with NRI again where those reports were late, but we were running a complex program. We were working with lead agencies, and they had to get the reports from their subs in order to turn in their reports to us, and there were some delays. There's no question about that. But again, that is not unusual for the startup of a program like this and the complex nature of the work that we were asking and coaching and working with lead agencies to do.
Back to my point that maybe we should have done a smaller program to get this thing up and started. So it also says that one of the requirements is to maintain for a minimum of 3 years after the completion of the award adequate books, records, audits, and supporting documents to verify the amounts, recipients, and uses of all disbursements of funds.
Correct.
I think there's many examples in here where we don't know where that stuff's at. If I recall, a bus went through an office and documents were lost. Money that we don't know how was spent. Money that was reallocated but really wasn't approved by the board. I think this is where we start getting into all the deficiencies that are outlined in the report. But yet, I think a lot of this stuff was known to you guys in 2011, but yet it wasn't fixed.
You've said a lot in that question,
There's
so
a lot
I
in
guess
here.
I need you to help me focus on what part of that you would like me to
I just want to know
address.
why you had administrative rules and throughout your 2 years there that the rules really weren't enforced.
The rules were enforced. We had contracts. We didn't put a dime out until there was a signed contract. We followed a process of receiving quarterly reports and not making payments until those quarterly reports were received. That was our general practice. We required those quarterly reports. We monitored those quarterly reports. We did not do the kind of enforcement review that you're talking about, but that was not generally what we did with our grantees. We relied on the reports that they turned in. Now, I will say at this point, the governor's office did want us to do more extensive monitoring, and they did provide 2 additional staff people, which made the total 5 NRI people. We, however, those 2 people, it wasn't enough. Those 2 people were immediately consumed with the process of having RFPs, issuing contracts, revising contracts, approving subcontracts, monitoring quarterly reports, and we weren't able to get to the kind of expense documentation that you're talking about, expense documentation, which is very different than tracking funds and where they went. Expense documentation is you give me a rent receipt, you give me your payroll records, you back up your expenses. We had in our grant agreement language that specifically stated that if we needed to see that information, and in a number of cases we did, you must provide it to us. But it was not standard procedure to have people sending us boxes of their accounting and backup documentation. Again, the governor's office asked us to do that and added staff. Those staff were consumed in the work of implementing the program, and we were able to get to that process in the spring of 2012.
Okay. I think there's lots of questions probably from other members about the stuff that went on or didn't go on during this process. I want to jump ahead to November 5th of 2010. Do you need a copy of this one?
I was thinking for Barbara. I think that
Well, I think this one
specifically.
She'll remember this one.
Well, that's kind of interesting, but I believe we
just-
did have a stack made up for each of our witnesses.
It would be helpful when you refer to a specific email, at least to give us the dates, and if you have a copy of it available so we could have it.
And we, in our discussions, we have those.
Okay. This one's dated November 5th, and it's to Ann Spillman at the Attorney General's office.
Yes.
Okay.
It's Spillane, Ann Spillane.
And it says, "Hi, Ann, just checking to see if there's been a decision on the raises/bonuses for my managers. I don't know if I made it clear, but I would prefer to do raises, particularly given that as a result of Tuesday's outcome, there is now a likelihood that this big initiative will continue beyond year 1. What was the purpose of that email?
When IVPA was created, each of the co-chairs, the parent co-chairs, the Attorney General's office and the Department of Public Health, took on various administrative functions for IVPA so that we did not have to create our own HR department and our own computer networking system. The Attorney General's office handled all of our HR, our human resources. I had, as part of the annual process of putting forth recommendations for salaries and so forth for the next year, they had to be signed off on by the Attorney General's office. I had made recommendations at that point that my managers, who had undergone huge amounts of work over the past months in setting up the Safety Networks program in the previous 2 years and NRI, I had suggested a raise for them. And I was checking in with Ann to see if those raises had been approved. This was part of our HR relationship.
One day after the election.
The recommendation had been on the book, had been upstairs in Ann Spillane's office for months.
Okay.
The recommendation had been made much earlier.
I want to focus on two things, and then I want to let some other people ask questions, Mr. Chairman, and I reserve the right to come back. But a study was going to be done on this program, and it was suggested that the University of Chicago Crime Lab evaluate the NRI program, including a cost-benefit analysis, and they agreed to do this pro bono. Why didn't the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority utilize that study of evaluating the program?
First of all, let me say that I was not aware that the University of Chicago was offering to do a pro bono study. I met with the University of Chicago. I went to their offices, to the lab, to the crime lab. They described the type of studies that they do. There was no cost discussion in that meeting. So, number one, I was surprised when I saw in the audit that there was a statement that the University of Chicago had offered a pro bono study.
It's our understanding that the governor recommended that we use that, that you use that.
I did not receive any recommendation from the governor's office that we conduct the study through the University of Chicago. I vaguely remember a conversation with Tony Irving about wanting to, or about data sets and the type of data sets that the University of Chicago had. I at no point received direction that the University of Chicago should be the place where we do our evaluation work.
Well, I guess regardless of that, the University of Illinois was chosen, right?
The University of Illinois was a sister state agency, state entity, intergovernmental agreement. They had the capacity and the expertise to do the kind of study we needed. And that's the other thing I want to emphasize here. We, at the time that we were initiating the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, let me find this in here because I want to be clear. 16. Okay. There it is. Okay. So the type of study that the University of Chicago discussed was certainly the type of study that we might have wanted to do several years into the program. What we needed at the time that we were initiating the program was a data system that could help us collect data that would help us determine if we were succeeding at maintaining a data system, implementing the program components and delivery models, providing the services, having the community providers regularly enter that data. We were building a program and needed to determine if we could do it, if we could take these models to scale across 23 communities, if we could perform the services at the level that we had perceived that we could. We needed to build a system that would answer some basic questions as well as some intermediate outcomes. We had an evaluation design and we established a data system that enabled us to collect participant data online. And this is, you know, I really want to say this. This is kind of a challenging part of the audit for me, because we were so proud of the data system that we had established. We went into this from the get-go knowing we needed to do evaluation. We requested $500,000 in the total budget to be available for evaluation, which is, by the way, like 1% of the, or less than 5% rather, of the total cost of the program. We knew we needed to evaluate and study and collect data that would enable us to figure out what we were doing and whether we were having impact. Every one of our components had two outcome goals that we measured through pre and post surveys. So we did not, we took this seriously.
With all due respect, it's, first of all, the Auditor General, is this the Auditor General? Yes. Report said that the governor's office definitely recommended the University of Chicago Crime Lab, and that the Illinois Violence Protection Authority officials declined that, and that said that they wasn't the type of study that they wanted. But the study you picked did not measure the success of the programs as to whether or not it was truly reducing violence. And that's been baffling to all of us since May, or since this report was issued, as to why you would conduct a study of a program that didn't measure whether or not it reduced violence.
Again, that was something we ultimately wanted to do if the program continued over a long period of time, but there are a number of reasons why it was not feasible to make that kind of determination at that stage of the program. Number one, and I think Director Catrone mentioned this when he spoke before the committee, the program only reached a very small percentage of community residents with prevention services. This was not go out and stop the shooting. These were prevention services that reached young children and teenagers, and in the hopes that these interventions would reduce risk and keep these kids on track. This was not, you cannot expect those kind of interventions to have immediate impact on violence prevention. Number two, a public health approach addresses risk factors and protective factors that are upstream in the hopes that it would impact and potentially reduce the violent behavior later in the life of a child. It's a setup for failure to expect these primary prevention strategies to have an immediate impact on rates of violence. I can't tell you, over the years, we would get applications from a youth group in a given community that would say, we're going to offer this after-school program for 30 youth in our community, and we're going to reduce the violence in our community by 25%. And we would say to them, you know, that's a problem for you. It's an unrealistic expectation. You can't impact crime rates of a whole community area by providing an after-school program for 30 kids. The same applies here. We were doing preventive services, and our ability to measure while the program was developing and being formed, and our focus needed to be on setting up the program and having people deliver it with fidelity and measuring intermediate successes. For example, with the school-based counseling program and the trauma reduction services? Were we reducing symptoms of trauma? That's what we were measuring, not whether those kids would, the services that we provided for those elementary school students were somehow going to stop the levels of violence that year.
But this somewhat contradicts what you said at the beginning as to why this program was so important to get up and running so quickly, is that we had 700 youth die, and this was a serious program for a serious problem, and we had to get it rolled out right away. But yet now you're saying that you really can't measure that 2 years into the program with a study because you're just trying to get it out there and get it started, and you can't measure anything yet.
Didn't say we can't measure anything. We measured a lot. We cannot expect this program in the first few years as it was being developed and as the capacity of these communities and as the infrastructure was being developed to expect that program to have an immediate impact on rates of violence was unrealistic. We needed a study that helped us determine if we were effectively implementing the program and gathering the data we needed, and whether the individual components were having some positive outcomes. And we measured each of those components in terms of those outcomes.
So you felt that, right or wrong, that the results of your study was that it was having positive results?
That's not what I said.
No, that's an additional question. Do you feel that as a result of the $500,000 study that it gave you the data you wanted, that things were being done right and that it's something should be continued?
The original results of the study is a awkward word here because it really wasn't a study. It was an evaluation and data system that we set up. That data and evaluation system did tell us how many youth we reached. It did tell us what services they were provided, and it did tell us what was the impact of the program on those measures. Let me say that, and we can talk more about this if you want, this was the first 18 months worth of data in a rapidly growing program where we were teaching the 190 providers out there to utilize the data system and to enter the pre and post surveys. And yes, there were data problems, and what we learned from the first report were the things that we needed to strengthen and do better to have. But we set it up. We put many, many hours into establishing a data collection system that would give us information about the program participants, the level of service provided, and the intermediate outcomes of those components.
Well, and it's not because maybe, well, I mean, the email that came last night in everyone's packet, and I'm assuming, Mr. Chairman, everyone has it, the last couple pages, an email from Mr. Sturmer, who was the governor's budget director, talking about the budget concerns for January 2011, which would have been for fiscal 2012. They and many others will also start.
Can we get her a copy of that packet? Staff is going to run her my copy down.
Okay.
We don't have printed copies, the ones that just went online yesterday, so that would be helpful.
Yeah, no, if we
see.
Well, I'm not asking a question, I'm just making a statement. Is that?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But she should probably still have that.
Mr. Sturmer states that they and many others will also start talking immediately about the neighborhood recovery as being funded by dramatic reductions in existing programs that are clearly accountable and successful. As you know, I am not at all persuaded that any of these ideas in the neighborhood recovery have any solid evidence to show they achieved their goals. So there was even concerns in the governor's own circles that the program wasn't working. My last line of questioning before I turn it over again.
I'm sorry, was that a question?
No, it was a statement.
Okay. We're here to answer questions.
We talk about the 2012 budget, and then you had this evaluation, you had 18 months on the ground. There were some serious concerns in the House Appropriations about going forward. And we had discussed cutting the NRI funding out because we were no longer going to give the governor a lump sum budget. You had a lot of people come to that. hearing, if you remember, the fire marshal got us in trouble, and you were full steam ahead on taking the program into the next year, correct?
There was strong advocacy on the part of the organizations. I didn't have them come, they came. And we were absolutely wanting what the governor had recommended in his budget. The governor recommended full funding for the program, and we wanted to see the program continue.
But I guess my point is that the governor had made his recommendation. You guys came in with hundreds of people, very passionate in your remarks. They were very passionate in their remarks. Not going to mention emails specifically, but there was a trail of emails saying we got a call to action, call your legislator, call Representative Arroyo, call Representative Rice. We got to have this thing moving forward. But yet all we've heard this summer from the governor and the administration is that once he recognized there were problems, he shut the program down and ended it. And that wasn't the case, was it?
I'm sorry, you're moving from,
No,
I'm not sure where.
We were
what
discussing
you're
moving this
asking
forward
here.
in 2012, in the 2012 budget, which would have been,
Which you did. There was a $10 million appropriation.
we cut it back, but then he increased the funding again. But my point is, all summer, the governor said he recognized the problems with NRI, and he ended the program.
That was 2012. The request for that was after 2012.
That was for 2013. Because you came in 2012, which would have started in July 1st of 2012.
For 2012 funding. Well, I'm not, are you talking about fiscal year 12, or are you talking about calendar year 12?
Calendar year 12 in our House appropriation hearings for fiscal year 2013.
Which, of course, started in the fall.
July.
Of
2012.
2012, right.
But there was no attempt by the governor to say, this program's a disaster, it's not being run right, we're going to end it. Was there?
Not to my knowledge.
That's what I thought. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll maybe have some questions later on.
Further questions? Representative Sandak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I think it's the morning still, right? Are we still in the morning? 5 minutes. Soon to be good afternoon, Ms. Shaw. I want to kind of take a little bit from what Senator Menard started and some of the concepts from Representative Rice, because I reread your opening statement, and rethinking it in juxtaposition to the audit, it looks like we have a tale of two tales, because what you say, and I have your written remarks here, and what I've read several times from the audit are just not jiving. If I'm hearing you right, and I'm reading your words right, good intentions and specific outcomes intended notwithstanding, is it your testimony, ma'am, that the NRI program was a successful program?
Yes. Which is not to say that there weren't problems and issues that in management of the program that couldn't have improved. What the audit doesn't speak to, and it's not its purpose, but what the audit doesn't speak to is what we did accomplish and how much was done.
Well, we'll get to that in a second, because to Mr. Representative Rice's last questions about the results, how they were measured, by whom, and what counts as successful versus aspirational. We'll get to that. Do you take issue with any of the comments and recommendations in the audit from the Auditor General?
I think that there are some findings that could be seen in another perspective.
Like what? Give me an example.
The whole issue of, let me figure out which to address. I mean, this audit is huge. There are some specific findings that I think, if double-checked, could be corrected. And then there are questions that arise about For example, let's go to the issue of budget year to the next. That's explainable from my point of view in a way that wasn't explained by whoever responded to the audit. There are a lot of had I been there were a lot of responses to the audit that I might have given.
Did anyone from the governor's office ask you to help with any type of response to the audit?
Well, I was there for
Well, I'm focusing on what the audit
a
says.
response to the audit.
Right, because you said, I think you said, that there may have been some things that you could explain or you maybe didn't agree with. And my question, Ms. Shaw, is did anyone from the governor's office ask you to help reply to the audit or explain
From the
audit?
governor's office?
Yes.
No.
Did anyone else ask you to respond to the audit and offer commentary on it?
The director of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority,
Jack Catrone?
Jack Catrone, did ask for responses to a few very specific items in
And
the
how did that
audit,
occur?
not to the audit as a whole.
Did he email you, call you? How did you correspond with Mr. Catrone about trying to add or offer responses to the audit?
He emailed me.
And you emailed him back?
I did.
Okay. Do you know if those emails are still around?
Well,
Do you have yours still? How's that?
these were in my personal email.
Well, you weren't with the state anymore, right?
That's correct.
Right. So that's what I'm asking you. Do you still retain those
I
communications?
don't know if I still have them, but it's possible.
Have you talked to Mr. Catrone about your testimony today at all?
No.
Have you talked to anyone other than that good-looking gentleman to your right about your testimony today?
Just if we could be a little more specific
Sure.
about talk to anyone. Some of that is attorney-client and.
Well, I don't want any attorney-client communication. I don't want any communications with Mr. Tice, or anyone else that be part of his law firm or any other lawyer. Have you talked to anyone else other than your legal team, advisors, et cetera, about your testimony today?
Just so that we're clear, are you talking about someone in government, in the
I'll get to
governor's
that.
office?
Private,
family
anyone.
members,
Sure.
friends, and
Well,
things?
sure. I mean, I talked to my husband. I talked to friends.
Anyone from the governor's office?
No.
Did anyone contact you from the governor's
No.
office? I'm going to go through some names here because Senator Menard started the questioning, and I think Representative Rice followed up. Whose idea was the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative?
It depends on whether you're asking whose idea was it to invest in violence prevention, which came from the governor's office. The plan, the model, the approach came from the authority.
So the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority was the originator of the program, the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative.
We recommended an approach and a design.
Okay. Did you come up with the name too?
I think initially we did. Initially we called it the Save Our Youth or something along that line, and the governor's office chose the Governor's Neighborhood Recovery Initiative.
And I'm going to ask you to be specific when you can. Who at the governor's office, if you can remember, helped with the name being formulated to NRI?
I can't tell you that. I can tell you that I was primarily interacting with Tony Irving and Malcolm Weems at the time, and somehow at some point it was communicated to me that that was the name that the governor wanted this to be called.
Okay, and that's a good idea. We should put some time constraints or parameters better around this. We're talking July or August of 2010, correct?
We're talking August, September.
August, September.
Because remember, it was third week in August when I was first approached with
Right.
the whole
And
notion.
we'll get to that. And that was by Mr. Weems, I think you earlier
Yes. Mhm.
said, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you just offered a little earlier that you primarily dealt with Dr. Irving and Mr. Weems from the governor's office. Isn't that
Primarily,
correct?
correct.
Primarily. With who else did you also interact with from the governor's office?
Well, in the early stages, Billy Ocasio was involved in meetings and discussions. I think there were one or two meetings where Jack Lavin was present from the governor's office. I think that's about, and of course, you know, during my regular budget sessions, I would deal with the budget director, David Vaught, but not necessarily in the context of this opening of this NRI. It was the people I mentioned.
And let's stay in that parameters that you, I think, identified August, September of 2010. You've identified Billy Ocasio, Jack Lavin, and maybe Mr. Vaught with respect to budget areas, in addition to Mr. Weems and Dr. Irving, correct?
Right. Though I don't think Director Vaught at the time was in.
In these initial meetings, the various conversations and meetings, was someone taking notes of these conversations?
Not to my knowledge.
And to kind of hone in on Mr. Ocasio at first, what do you recall talking with him about and or his involvement in the initiation of or the inception of the NRI program?
Oh, I don't have a very detailed recollection of
Generally,
that. I
did he
know
add-
that he was involved in engaging Latino ministers to learn more about the program. He was interested in whether there were Latino communities that were being served by the program, which there were. He was just part of the team.
Okay. Dr. Irving, same question. What do you recall at the inception of NRI, her comments or involvement with respect to NRI at the beginning?
Well, I certainly can't remember specific comments.
I think I said generally. I'm just looking for an
Tony
overview.
and Malcolm were the key people from the governor's office who were working with me to develop the program. Malcolm from a budget perspective, finances, and general direction, and Tony more from the sort of programmatic side.
Same thing with Jack Lavin, and then I'm gonna ask you some questions about some of your emails and some of the communications, at least that's been developed as a record. Go back to Mr. Lavin. What involvement, again, generally, at the inception of NRI, do you recall Mr. Lavin participating in or offering?
You know, his participation was so limited that I can't even tell you, literally, what meeting, what day. He really was present maybe for one or two meetings that I participated in. There may well have been interactions in the governor's office that involved him, but in terms of meetings I was involved in, I recall that he was involved in one or two. So, and I didn't have much direct contact with him at all. I included him on emails, on things, but there was not anywhere near the level of interaction that.
All right, and I'm going to ask you about two more gentlemen, Warren Ribley and Andrew Ross. Did you have any involvement with those
I
gentlemen?
really didn't. I had, there was an economic piece to this that I really had no connection to or real knowledge of. The only interaction I recall with Mr. Ross was that he was planning or part of planning the announcement of the program. And so there's an email or two about what the agenda was going to look like and what the plan was for the press announcement of the program.
Okay. From its inception generally, and using your words, mid to late August, what was the time constraints? Did anyone from the governor's office said to you, all right, Barbara, we want to get this program out the door by X date?
I was asked to get the program out and running within a couple months.
In your experience with the state of Illinois as its original director of the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority, this was the largest project you'd ever been given, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Had you ever, on a smaller project, been given a time window of a couple of weeks or a few weeks or a couple of months to get something out the door?
No.
So this was the only time, and it was the biggest project, you've been asked to get something accomplished in a really truncated portion of time. Isn't that correct?
There was an urgency about the violence problem, and we were encouraged to get this program up and running.
There was an urgency, there's no question about it, but I just heard your answers to Representative Rice talking about this project being a long-term type of preventative solution. You weren't looking at quick efficacies. There was no way that we were going to stop violence because this money was out the door in 6 weeks, right?
This was an investment in communities
But
and
why
an
is- okay, but
investment
why a
in
hurried
violence
investment?
prevention strategies in communities.
I'll accept that, and I think I have no doubt you're being completely forthright. Why does it have to be expedited then?
Because it was an urgent problem, and we were asked to get it going.
But you wanted this
and we
to
were
work, too,
responding to, of course.
Okay.
And I hold that it did.
Although you can't show me anything that has any metrics, any accountability, because the audit is absolutely clear. We don't have a report saying, this is what this money did, this is what it accomplished.
Oh, that's not exactly the case. I mean,
Where can I go?
We reported on the number of people that participated in these programs, the services that they received, and the beginnings of the intermediate outcome data that was just coming out as I was, in those last few months I was there. They were pointing out data problems with the pre and post surveys, but we're able to indicate some perspective. The greatest measures of success of NRI, number one, is that we established these community networks and engaged hundreds of organizations in delivering very important services to communities. We reached thousands of kids. We had thousands of jobs. And remember, that was a primary goal of NRI too. Jobs, jobs. Reaching neighborhood recovery, recognizing both violence and economic distress. So we provided summer jobs for kids. We provided jobs for mentors. There were counselors.
Michelle, did you think, were you worried though? You had a small department. All of a sudden, you didn't get additional personnel, although I think you said earlier that's the greatest regret. You didn't ask for.
But we did get additional personnel. We didn't get enough.
Right. Was there any concern in your mind from mid-August of 2010 through October that the size and scope of this program that you are now running and the marching orders of getting it done real quick, were you concerned that that wasn't going to get done right?
It was a massive undertaking. We worked very, very hard. We accomplished a great deal. And at no point did I feel that what we were doing was and would be a failure.
Fair enough. We live we can't suspend our disbelief in life when we go through endeavors. You knew there was an election coming up, right?
I'm a thinking person, yes.
And I think a thinking person knows reality. Were you ever asked to expedite this program because of that pending election?
I was not.
Did you think maybe, because this is the largest endeavor you've ever undertaken, you'd never earlier been given time parameters of such expedited scope? Maybe that's what this was all about, getting this done right before an election? Had that crossed your mind?
What crossed my mind and what I responded to was the urgency of the violence problem in the Chicago area, and I was delighted that the governor wanted to invest in violence prevention and wanted to get something going quickly, and that was the situation.
That was the extent of your thinking.
I can't speculate as
I'm not asking you to speculate. I'm asking you, a thinking person, what you were thinking at that time.
I was thinking there's an urgent violence problem, and the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority has been given resources to do something we have always wanted to do, which is take this programming to scale in multiple communities.
It's like manna from heaven, right? This is a project you've always wanted to do, and all of a sudden now you had the money, and you had quick marching orders nonetheless. But you're going to be able to now tackle something you've wanted to tackle.
And we did.
I think the Auditor General might disagree in that audit that we have in front of us, and the whole purpose for this, I would suggest, may differ with your conclusion on that, and we're going to get into that. One more question before we get into the documents. Did you ever talk to Governor Quinn about this project?
the day of the announcement.
Which was when? Remind me.
Oh, gee. Early October?
In a group?
In a group, we were standing in front of microphones.
Where were you?
Oh, gee. We were somewhere on the south side. I don't remember.
Remember the tone and tenor of his words at that
I don't.
event? What was your mindset then?
I was asked at that press conference to describe the NRI program, and I was very excited about the kind of work that we were going to undertake.
Were you distressed that the governor pulled the plug on NRI? Or he says he did anyway. Are you distressed by the multiple media reporting of the governor's comments? We shut it down. We learned all these bad things that happened from the audit report.
I was disappointed.
Because you thought it was a success, correct?
I thought it was a good program. And I, again, acknowledge, no question, that there were findings and issues related to the management of the program. But what that audit didn't address was what we did do and what we did accomplish.
Let's talk about certain things. And I'm looking at the audit report. In September 11, 2012, there was a meeting with Mr. Holland's office. Malcolm Weems, Tony Irving, and Errol Laudermilk. Do you know Errol Laudermilk?
I do.
The Auditor General's report, and this is CM7, says that the Governor's Deputy Chief of Staff, Tony Irving, and Associate General Counsel Errol Laudermilk said, quote, throughout the meeting that they did not understand why Barbara Shaw was unable to provide certain documents for the audit. Had you ever been told that you were being blamed for not producing documents responsive to Mr. Holland's office requests for documents?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Had anyone ever told you that they blamed you for failing to produce certain documents responsive to the request of the Auditor General?
Anybody told me?
Did anyone say, hey, Barb, you didn't produce documents. It's your fault. The Auditor General doesn't have what he needs to finish his report. Is that vague?
No.
No one ever said that?
I recall, I'm trying to think. There were conversations where Ann Spillane mentioned to me that people in the governor's office had expressed that sentiment that you read there, that somehow I was not providing documents.
Is that true or false?
It is not true. I did my best to respond to the requests for documentation, and I'm not saying I didn't miss something, because it was a pretty wild period that last few months. I had planned to retire and was going to retire, and the program had been moved, and the audit was there, and I was wrapping up. But I did my best to do a responsible job of responding to the Auditor General's request for information.
The Office of the Auditor General asked, there were 10 questions that are associated with the audit document CM7. And question 6 says, the IVPA, the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority, put out a request for RFP documents to lead agencies prior to the announcement of the NRI program. Did the governor's office authorize that activity? Do you see that?
This question is the one.
IVPA put out RFP documents. Yes.
You see that? Okay. The transcript from Dr. Irving's response is as follows, quote, IVPA was responsible for carrying out the program. Since the goal was to cut down on violence, the governor's office thought the IVPA would be the right place to house this effort. Irving added that the MEE model for the NRI program was developed by a guy from UIC that is now evaluating the program for Shaw and IVPA. The governor's office wanted the crime lab to do the analysis of the NRI program, but Shaw wanted this contract at UIC. Is that correct or incorrect?
There are a number of incorrect statements
Okay.
in this response.
Break them down for me.
First of all, the fellow that developed the me model was not the guy from UIC. Okay, so that's just wrong.
Was the me model, but was the me model, the MEE model, the basis for the NRI program?
For two of the components,
Okay.
not for three, not for the other three.
Okay.
Just for two of the components: mentoring plus jobs and parent leadership.
Okay. And anything else that's incorrect about
Now,
Dr. Irving's comments?
I want to point out that her response says the governor's office wanted the crime lab to do an analysis of the NRI program.
Okay,
It doesn't.
so
Let me
make sure we're clear.
May I finish?
You may.
It doesn't say the governor's office told Barbara Shaw to utilize the University of Chicago. I never heard that level of direction or push from the governor's office.
Or Dr. Irving, right?
Right.
So I want to be clear, because we're going to hear from her. I want to be clear. She never told you or anyone else from the governor's office that they wanted you to use the University of Chicago's free evaluation services.
I am saying that I never in any communications, and maybe I missed something, but I never understood or heard that the University of Chicago was offering a free study. It really was a total surprise to me when that came out, number one. Number two, I mentioned earlier that at some point I remember, and remember this was 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, I do remember a conversation with Tony about data and data sets and the kind of study that she had in mind. And my responding to, I don't remember even the content of the conversation. I remember it was about the data sets, and it would be good if we could hook up this with school data and crime data, and I remember, I don't know what I said, but I certainly remember that, again, as with the discussion with the University of Chicago, that wasn't exactly what we needed at that point in time. But I never heard, we want you to do this evaluation with the University of Chicago. Do it. I would have responded to that and dealt with that as a directive. Number two, I never heard or understood my communication with the University of Chicago to reflect that they were willing to do a study free of cost.
Ms. Shaw, can you just quickly, because this jumped out at me as ironic, perhaps, but maybe completely kosher. The model that NRI was utilizing, this MEAD program developed by
two of the components
from the University of Illinois, Chicago.
No.
Oh, the gentleman wasn't.
No. That's what's wrong in here.
Got it. Okay, because you've asked UIC to evaluate, and it would strike me as ironic if someone from the university was evaluating their own project.
This is wrong.
So Dr. Irving's just wrong on this.
She's wrong on that.
Okay. You may have seen some media reports with respect to the governor's contention, and particularly Brooke Anderson from the governor's office commenting that allegations have been taken seriously and they're working on tightening up grants in addition to, quote, ditching the program, the agency, and the people that ran it. Did you hear any comment? You ever read?
I'm sorry, what are you reading from?
A comment from Brooke Anderson. It was on, I think it was May 28, 2014, a CBS Chicago story that said, it's attributable to spokesperson Brooke Anderson on behalf of the governor, that said, we take these allegations seriously, and, quote, ditching the program, the agency, and the people that ran it. Do you have any response to that kind of commentary? Were you ditched? Did the governor?
I was not ditched. I resigned. I had planned to resign and planned to retire, actually, before the NRI program came along, but decided I would, of course, see that through, and had planned to retire at the end of 2012, prior to any of the decisions that were made. about the program.
I think this was, thank you, alluded to in your opening, and I'm not sure if it was Senator Menard or Representative Rice or maybe my imagination. You were talking about the inception of the program dealing with the most violent neighborhoods in Chicago or the Chicagoland area. And I remember Senator Menard rightfully intimating perhaps that the initiation of the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority wasn't just a Chicago or Chicagoland issue. It was a statewide program. And certainly why it was only focused in Chicago or Chicagoland is a little curious to me. But what's more curious is there were certain neighborhoods that were excluded, that didn't get NRI money, that clearly are in the top 20 of the most violent neighborhoods in Chicago. Explain to me, Ms. Shaw, how it is that West Englewood, Chatham, New City, South Chicago, West Town, near West Side, and West Pullman are excluded from NRI monies, but neighborhoods like Hermosa, that one I found amazing. Thornton Township, I think, got money. Cicero, certainly not Decatur and certainly not East Springfield. But how is it that those neighborhoods, within the parameters you've addressed, were excluded?
Let me just say that excluded sounds like there was an active decision that said no, 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 no. There was not an active decision that said no to those communities. Number one, the program, we were asked to implement the program in the Chicago area and in the south suburbs. In the 2 years prior to NRI, the Safety Networks program was initiated out of the governor's office. And the Safety Networks program was a violence prevention program. It involved half a dozen state agencies convened by DHS and sitting around a table to plan safety networks. And the Department of Human Services reported to our group that they had conducted an analysis of communities, and they used multiple, and this is really important because it's not just about the violent crime rate in each community in Chicago at the time. They looked at least that's what was reported, and that's what we put out in the RFP, for Safety Networks, that these communities were identified as having high rates of violence, poverty, and youth disaffection from school, i.e. push-outs.
So let me just stop you. Ms. Shaw, did West Englewood not qualify then?
I can't tell you. All I'm saying to you is that we relied upon the list of communities that the Department of Human Services produced for the Safety Networks program. We said at the time, okay, we got to get going. Let's go with the communities that had not, in the not too far distant past, had been identified, and communities, many of which we were already working in, so we knew there was some basic infrastructure there. These are the communities that we went with.
Okay, you mentioned a study. I'm sorry, yes.
I do if it's kosher.
At some point, if you want to ask this next question, you asked me if we could take a 5-minute break.
Absolutely.
I
Now's
just
the
need a
perfect
restaurant
time.
break.
Absolutely.
If we can do that at some point that's convenient.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Go. We'll take a 5-minute, if that's okay.
Is that all right? I'll be right
I'm
back.
looking at the chairman and the co-chairman. If we take a 5-minute break, the witness
Sure.
requested it.
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, why don't we take 15 minutes? Some of you folks may
Thank you.
need to take a walk as well.
Some of the members get to come and go, but.
Okay,
the
we'll be at
witness
ease
does
of the
not.
call of the chair.
Thank you.